For some men, admiring the world itself rather than the creator of the world, have represented it as existing without any maker and eternal, and as impiously, as falsely, have represented God as existing in a state of complete inactivity. While it would have been right, on the other hand, to marvel at the might of God as the creator and father of all, and to admire the world in a degree not exceeding the bounds of moderation. But Moses, who had early reached the very summits of philosophy, this is in accordance with the description of him in the Bible, where he is represented as being learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and who had learnt from the oracles of God the most numerous and important of the principles of nature, was well aware that it is indispensable that in all existing things there must be an active cause and a passive subject, and that the active cause is the intellect of the universe, thoroughly unadulterated and thoroughly unmixed, superior to virtue and superior to science, superior even to abstract good or abstract beauty. While the passive subject is something inanimate and incapable of motion by any intrinsic power of its own, but having been set in motion and fashioned and endowed with life by the intellect, became transformed into that most perfect work, this world. But the great Moses, thinking that a thing which has not been uncreated is as alien as possible from that which is visible before our eyes, for everything which is the subject of our senses exists in birth and in changes, and is not always in the same condition, has attributed eternity to that which is invisible and discerned only by our intellect as a kinsman and a brother, while of that which is the object of our external senses he had predicated generation and an appropriate description, as an appropriate description. Since, then, this world is visible and the object of our external senses, it follows of necessity that it must have been created, on which account it was not without a wise purpose that he recorded its creation, giving a very venerable account of God. And he says that the world was made in 6 days, not because the Creator stood in need of a length of time, for it is natural that God should do everything at once, not merely by uttering a command, but by even thinking of it, but because the things created required arrangement. And number is akin to arrangement, and of all numbers, 6 is, by the laws of nature, the most productive. For of all the numbers from the unit upwards, it is the first perfect one, being made equal to its parts, and being made complete by them. The number 3 being half of it, and the number 2 a third of it, and the unit a sixth of it, and, so to say, it is formed so as to be both male and female, and is made up of the power of both natures. For in existing things the odd number is the male, and the even number is the female. Accordingly, of odd numbers, the first is the number 3, and of even numbers the first is 2. And the 2 numbers multiplied together make 6. It was fitting, therefore, that the world, being the most perfect of created things, should be made according to the perfect number, namely 6. And as it was to have in it the causes of both, which arise from combination, that it should be formed according to a mixed number, the first combination of odd and even numbers, since it was to embrace the character both of the male who sows the seed and of the female who receives it. We must mention as much as we can of the matters contained in his account, since to enumerate them all is impossible, for he embraces that beautiful world which is perceptible only by the intellect, as the account of the first day will show. For God, as apprehending beforehand, as a God must do, that there could not exist a good imitation without a good model, and that of the things perceptible to the external senses nothing could be faultless which was not fashioned with reference to some archetypal idea conceived by the intellect, when he had determined to create this visible world, previously formed that one which is perceptible only by the intellect, in order so using an incorporeal model formed as far as possible on the image of God, he might then make this corporeal world a younger likeness of the elder creation, which should embrace as many different genera perceptible to the external senses as the other world contains of those which are visible only to the intellect. But that world which consists of ideas, it were impious in any degree to attempt to describe or even to imagine. How it was created we shall know if we take for our guide a certain image of the things which exist among us. When any city is founded through the exceeding ambition of some king or leader who lays claim to absolute authority, and is at the same time a man of brilliant imagination eager to display his good fortune, then it happens at times that some man coming up who from his education is skillful in architecture, and he, seeing the advantageous character and beauty of the situation, first of all sketches out in his own mind nearly all the parts of the city which is about to be completed. The temples, the gymnasia, the prytania, and the markets, the harbor, the docks, the streets, the arrangement of the walls, the situations of the dwelling houses, and of the public and other buildings. Then, having received in his own mind, as on a waxen tablet, the form of each building, he carries in his heart the image of a city, perceptible as yet only by the intellect, the images of which he stirs up in memory, which is innate in him, and, still further, engraving them in his mind like a good workman, keeping his eyes fixed on his model, he begins to raise the city on stones and wood, making the corporeal substances to resemble each of the incorporeal ideas. Now we must form a somewhat similar opinion of God, who, having determined to found a mighty state, first of all conceived its form in his mind, according to which form he made a world perceptible only by the intellect, and then completed one visible to the external senses, using the first one as a model. As therefore the city, when previously shadowed out in the mind of the man of architectural skill, had no external place, but was stamped solely in the mind of the workman, so in the same manner neither can the world which existed in ideas have had any other local position except the divine reason which made them. For what other place could there be for his powers which should be able to receive and contain, I do not say all, but even any single one of them whatever, in its simple form? And the power and faculty which could be capable of creating the world has for its origin that good which is founded on truth. For if anyone were desirous to investigate the cause on account of which this universe was created, I think that he would come to no erroneous conclusion, that if he were to say, as one of the ancients did say, that the Father and Creator was good, on which account he did not grudge the substance a share of his own excellent nature, since it had nothing good of itself, but was able to become everything, for the substance was of itself destitute of arrangement, of quality, of animation, of distinctive character, and full of all disorder and confusion. And it received a changing transformation to what is opposite to its condition, to this condition, and most excellent, being invested with order, quality, animation, resemblance, identity, arrangement, harmony, and everything which belongs to the more excellent idea. And if anyone were to desire to use more undisguised terms, he would not call the world which is perceptible only to the intellect anything else but the reason of God, already occupied in the creation of the world. For neither is a city, while only perceptible to the intellect, anything else but the reason of the architect, who is already designing to build one perceptible to the external senses, on the model of that which is so only to the intellect. This is the doctrine of Moses, not mine. Accordingly, he, when recording the creation of man in words which follow, asserts expressly that he was made in the image of God, and that the image be a part of the image. If the image be a part of the image, then manifestly so is the entire form, namely, the whole of this world perceptible by the external senses, which is a greater imitation of the divine image than the human form is. It is manifest also that the archetypal seal, which we call that world which is perceptible only to the intellect, must be itself the archetypal model, the idea of ideas, the reason of God. But if the beginning spoken of by Moses is not to be looked upon as spoken of according to time, then it may be natural to suppose that it is beginning according to number, the beginning according to number that is indicated, so that in the beginning he created is equivalent to, first of all, he created the heaven, for it is natural in reality that he should have been the first, that should have been the first object created, being both the best of all created things, and being also made of the purest substance, because it was destined to be the most holy abode of the visible gods who are perceptible by the external senses. For if the Creator had made everything at the same moment, still those things which were created in beauty would no less have had a regular arrangement, for there is no such thing as beauty in disorder. But order is a due consequence and connection of things precedent and subsequent, if not in the completion of a work, at all events in the intention of the maker, for it is owing to order that they become accurately defined and stationary and free from confusion. In the first place, therefore, from the model of the world perceptible only by intellect, the Creator made an incorporeal heaven and an invisible earth, in the form of air and of empty space, the former of which he called darkness, because the air is black by nature, and the other he called the abyss, for empty space is very deep and yawning with immense width. Then he created the incorporeal substance of water and of air, and above all he spread light, being the seventh thing made, and this again was incorporeal, and a model of the sun, perceptible only to intellect, and of all the light-giving stars which are destined to stand together in heaven. And to air and light he considered worthy of the preeminence. For the one he called the breath of God, because it is air, which is the most life-giving of things, and of life the causer is God. And the other he called light, because it is surpassingly beautiful, for that which is perceptible only by intellect is as far more brilliant and splendid than that which is seen, as I conceive. The sun is than darkness, or day than night, or the intellect than any other of the outward senses, by which men, inasmuch as it is the guide of the entire soul, men judge, inasmuch as it is the guide of the entire soul, or the eyes, than any other part of the body. And the invisible divine reason, perceptible only by intellect, he calls the image of God. And the image of this image is that light, perceptible only by the intellect, which is the image of the divine reason, which has explained its generation. And it is a star above the heavens, the source of those stars which are perceptible by the external senses. And if anyone were to call it universal light, he would not be very wrong, since it is from that the sun and the moon and all the other planets and fixed stars derive their due light, in proportion as each has power given to it, that unmingled and pure light being obscured when it begins to change, according to the change from that which is perceptible only by the intellect to that which is perceptible by the external senses, for none of those things which are perceptible to the external senses is pure. Moses is right also when he says that darkness was over the face of the abyss, for the air is in a manner spread above the empty space, since having mounted up it entirely fills all that open and desolate and empty place, which reaches down to us from the heavens below the moon. And after the shining forth of that light perceptible only to the intellect which existed before the sun, then its adversary darkness yielded, as God put a wall between them and separated them, well knowing their opposite characters and the enmity existing between their natures, in order therefore that they may not war against one another from being continually brought into contact, so that war would prevail instead of peace. God, turning want of order into order, did not only separate light and darkness, but did also place boundaries in the middle of the space between the two, by which he separated the extremities of each. For if they had approximated, they must have produced confusion, preparing for the contest for the supremacy with great and unextinguishable rivalry, if boundaries established between them had not separated them and prevented them from clashing together. And these boundaries are evening and morning, the one of which heralds in the good tidings that the sun is about to rise, gently dissipating the darkness, and evening comes on as the sun sets, gently receiving the collective approach of darkness. And these, I mean morning and evening, must be placed in the class of incorporeal things, perceptible only by the intellect. For there is absolutely nothing in them which is perceptible by the external senses, but they are entirely ideas and measures and forms and seals, incorporeal as far as regards the generation of other bodies. But when light came and darkness retreated and yielded to it, and boundaries were set in the space between the two, namely evening and morning, then of necessity the measure of time was immediately perfected, which also the Creator called day. And he called it not the first day, but one day, and it is spoken of thus on account of the single nature of the world perceptible only by the intellect, which has a single nature. The incorporeal world, then, was already completed, having its seat in the divine reason, and the world perceptible by the external senses was made on the model of it, and the first portion of it, being also the most excellent of all made by the Creator, was the heaven, which he truly called the firmament, as being corporeal. For the body is by nature firm, inasmuch as it is divisible into three parts. And what other idea of solidity and of body can there be, except that it is something which may be measured in every direction? Therefore he, very naturally contrasting that which was perceptible to the external senses, and corporeal with that which was perceptible only by the intellect and incorporeal, called this the firmament. Immediately afterwards he, with great propriety and entire correctness, called it the heaven, either because it was already the boundary of everything, or because it was the first of all visible things which he created. And after its second rising he called the time day, referring the entire space and measure of a day to the heaven, on account of its dignity and honor among the things perceptible to the external senses. But in the first creation of the universe, as I have said already, God produced the whole race of trees out of the earth in full perfection, having their fruit not incomplete, but in a state of entire ripeness, to be ready for the immediate and undelayed use and enjoyment of the animals which were about immediately to be born. Accordingly, he commanded the earth to produce these things, and the earth, as though it had for a long time been pregnant and travailing, produced every sort of seed and every sort of tree, and also of fruit in unspeakable abundance. And not only were these produced fruits to be food for living animals, but enough also to serve as a preparation for the continuous production of similar fruits hereafter, covering substances consisting of seed, in which are the principles of all plants undistinguishable and invisible, but destined hereafter to become manifest and visible in the periodical maturity of the fruit. For God thought fit to endue nature with a long duration, making the races that he was creating immortal, and giving them a participation in eternity, on which account he led on and hastened the beginning toward the end, and caused the end to turn backwards to the beginning. For from plants come fruit, as the end might come from the beginning. And from the fruit comes the seed, which again contains the plant within itself, so that a fresh beginning may come from the end. For he foreknew with respect to men who were not yet born what sort of beings they would be as to their opinions, forming conjectures on what was likely and probable, of which the greater part would be reasonable, though falling short of the character of unadulterated truth, and trusting rather to visible phenomena than to God, and admiring sophistry rather than wisdom. And again he knew that surveying the periods of the sun and the moon, to which are owing the summers and winters, and the alternations of spring and autumn, they would conceive the revolutions of the stars in heaven to be the causes of all the things which every year should be produced and generated on the earth, accordingly that no one might venture, either through shameless impudence or inordinate ignorance, to attribute to any created thing the primary causes of things. He said, "Let them run over in their minds the first creation of the universe, when, before the sun or the moon existed, the earth brought forth all kinds of plants and all kinds of fruits. And seeing this in their minds, let them hope that it will again also bring forth such, according to the appointment of the Father, when it shall seem good to him, without his having need of the aid of any of the sons of men beneath the heavens, to whom he has given powers, though not absolute ones. For as a charioteer holding the reins, or a helmsman with his hand upon the rudder, he guides everything as he pleases, in accordance with law and justice, needing no one else as his assistant, for all things are possible to God."